Okay, here we are again, our third interview with Anette Carlson, and I'm very honored to have your presence. And you always light up my life when I get to talk to you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a great joy to be here with you and connect again. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, thank you. So we talked about 4 different themes, and we each have 2. And you started with the theme of suffering. So why don't we start with that? Tell me about why that is on your mind now.
Well, perhaps because the time that we're living now, humanity is facing a lot of suffering. So maybe it's good to confront that, or to see how we could pursue. Is there a way to live without suffering?
So what do you think?
So this has been my passion actually for the past 20 years. It's nothing new, but we can just say that because the world is really in a state of a challenge, suffering is a big word. I was introduced to the path that I'm on, oneness, through these simple questions. Is it possible to be free of suffering? That very question was somebody having a lecture in my hometown, Helsingborg, Sweden. And that intrigued me because I've always felt that uncomfortableness that you can call suffering. Suffering is such a big word because it can imply that your life is threatened or something. But I've really gone into depth about this subject, and it brought me into a limitless state and a journey with no end, you could say. So these are big words, but it's actually my experience of moving towards that, looking at that question that will bring you into an answer that can be very helpful in the most practical way. So it's not some kind of philosophy for me. It was more like, I think I shared with you, I had that what you can call divine intervention happen in 2002. And it was that very thing that the presence came from inside the very core of my being, and outside the universe at the same time. Paradox. And anything with a paradox, the mind cannot wrap itself around. So you just have to experience it. And that experience was at this lecture where this man had talked about suffering. Is it possible to be free of suffering? And he was also giving something called experience healing. He said he had been hit with something. He had been touched by something in his heart. And he just wished this for everyone, like a positive disease, he said. I just wish this for everyone. But you need to look at this, he said, about the suffering. Or so these are like two, like you could say, opposites. The bliss inside and the suffering, like how does that go together? And I work as a therapist in alternative medicine, holistic medicine. And at the time I was working day and night, always worked at the hospital in Helsingborg with the employees, all stress-related symptoms with craniosacral and kinesiology, and hoping, and of course I helped many people relieve stress, but also hoping that my own stress level and suffering would diminish. So this lecture then was very interesting to hear, even though I didn't understand much of it, I have to admit. But this experience that was given on this lecture came to change my whole life. So that's why that topic is very much perhaps valid now to speak about, as the world is facing what maybe many of us have been looking at in our lives. Even though we don't have anything particular to be suffering about, like in my life, I didn't have any trauma, anything. I had a beautiful, loving family. And still there is this suffering of just living, or what is the meaning of this? And it's not psychological per se, even though it can be psychological in a sense, but it's more an inner search of have to find something. And I don't even know what it is to find, but to relieve suffering, because people are definitely not happy in this world. So that divine intervention that happened, it was like I shared with you earlier, that it was like a voice, and I don't hear voices, haven't heard anything like it since, but it gave like a teaching of this very topic. And it said, this presence that came from inside and outside at the same time, it said, don't be afraid to face your inner suffering. And it was like a thunderous voice. It was like the voice of heaven. And it shook me, because I realized that's the very thing I am not doing for sure. I'm not facing this suffering. I'm always looking for ways to get out of suffering, for other people and for myself. Like how, and this presence then stayed with me. And this is what I called the indweller, or the Antriyaman. It is the divine or a sacred presence inside. And it was awakened at the same time as this teaching came from the heavens. So these two things, from that day on, it was 20 years ago, they kind of my two companions. Those two things go together. And for me, there are no other teachings really that is necessary if you get those two. And the man who was holding the course, he said he would come back and have, or the lecture, he said he'd come back and have a course a week after. And it was on that course that I got more clarity what had happened to me on the lecture. Because then he spoke more about his own experience, and I could understand what he was saying more. And a process started for me where, like this man shared, he was an atheist, by the way, typical Swedish person who don't have any particular religious beliefs. And for me, that was a missing piece of the puzzle. You know, so many paths and teachers and gurus and religions and this and that. But here's somebody who's just want to help people in this world. And I think many people are like that, coming into that we're human beings. And our very core of our nature is carrying something in us that we keep forgetting to look for. We're like looking outside. We're looking in this place that the answer is not. And I know many great teachers have said the answer lies within you, but what does that mean? You know, it needs to be practical. I'm very practical. And this man, who's a farmer and a carpenter, he is very practical. He never read a spiritual book. And that's why at first I didn't understand what he was saying, and he was also deaf. So it's very difficult. But then as he spoke practically, I fully got what he's saying. So all these books I've been reading since I was very young about spirituality, philosophy, and this and that. It's just stuff to feed the mind. It's just not giving me the experience. But here is the simple man who clearly had an experience, and whatever presence he had become contagious. I had caught that positive disease, definitely. He said, if there are 7 billion people on the planet, there are 7 billion different ways to relate to your own Antriyaman. And I never heard of that word before. And he wrote it on the big board, Antaryaman. And it means the one that dwells within. And I go, how come I never heard of that? You know, I've studied so many books and, you know, so, and I thought, I definitely want to go get to know this Antaryaman. I never heard of that. So then he said, well, there's only really 2 things you need to do to have that awakened. And that is to be interested in it, to create a bond with it within you. And second thing is, then he said something, that almost made me fall off the chair. And that was, don't be afraid to meet your inner suffering. And that was exactly what the voice had told me on the lecture the night or the week before. So again, that topic of suffering was introduced. And then I knew that it had been given to me from inside my own universe inside, before hearing it from someone who clearly was not a spiritual teacher, because he's never read any spiritual books. He never held any lectures because he was deaf. He says, I'm sorry, I'm not a speaker, but I need to just share that this is here, and it has nothing to do with what you believe in. So my journey started there, Stephen, where I asked this man, well, how do I go about it practically? And he said, well, you buy an egg timer, when you cook eggs.
Okay.
You just put the timer, and then you just stay. If you had experienced some suffering, something uncomfortable, it doesn't have to be a big thing. He shared then about his own suffering because he's being deaf. As a child, he was teased, so he would feel embarrassed. So he would start it there. He put the egg timer and sat and felt embarrassed. So instead of trying to explain it away or trying to find a solution or blame it on somebody or feeling sorry for himself, some story, he just decided to experience the actual feeling of that suffering until the egg timer is ringing. He said he decided himself to do certain amounts of minutes. So I said, that's a good idea. And this is before the iPhones and this. So I actually went out and bought an egg timer. And I said, I'm very interested in this Antriyaman. So since I had that experience on that lecture already, I knew that there was such a thing. It's not some kind of weird, hocus pocus thing out there in the universe. This was real for me. So I started relating to my Antriyaman and started welcoming the uncomfortableness that we can call suffering in my world. So that's how I started my journey, the awakening journey, you can say, because you start realizing that all the answers really do reside within, like the great teachers are saying. We just need a practical tool how to go about finding that.
So let me give you my sort of how this lands with me. So I find it somewhat ironic that you want to talk about suffering, because I was a mental health counselor for 8 years. And I have to say, you have led the most charmed life of anyone I've ever met. And now maybe my sphere of people is very limited, but much of what you explained about your family upbringing, very few people experience, just so much love and support from their parents to start. And like the whole thing with you hitchhiking across California and nothing bad happened to you. And I'm sure there were things bad that happened to you, but you seem to always be protected and you always seem to be guided. And so it's sort of, I find it somewhat ironic that the theme is suffering, because that just doesn't jive with how I see you.
It's probably because there are 3 types of suffering, as I have learned and observed. There's physical suffering, which we know can happen when disease hits us or any kind of thing with the body. Then there's psychological suffering that we all know. And then there's existential suffering that has no reason for it. And there's no solution except awakening enlightenment. And this is what Buddha supposedly had. He was a prince that lived in a beautiful palace, and he had no psychological suffering, no physical suffering, but he kept seeking. He wasn't happy. He needs to find the answers. And the king, his father, said, well, why don't you find the answers here inside the palace? He goes, no, I need to go out. So he finally convinced his father to go out on this journey. And that that story always intrigued me, that there's always in humanity suffering. And like actually, the positive thing about suffering, if I may say so, it is if we can be conscious that we are suffering, that's a very good thing for the awakening enlightenment process. Because see, most people, what I found when I started seeing this thing of, oh, you have to meet suffering, right? Because obviously I've had a lot of existential suffering, some psychological suffering, and once in a while you'll have physical suffering too. So the three of these are always like in one unit, divided somehow. So if the physical suffering is less, then the existential suffering or the psychological suffering is more. Or if the psychological suffering is a lot, then very little existential suffering and little physical suffering maybe. At least that was my observation during this time. So I found as I started to share my experience after I was going to India then, about a year and a half after discovering this egg timer, there was because what I discovered is when I sat with the uncomfortableness or the suffering, and it was usually like, I would not be socially correct a lot. I would say the wrong thing at the wrong time. That was very typical of me. And I would always feel embarrassed about that. So I kind of mirrored myself in this farmer. I said, oh yeah, I'm always like embarrassed about how I conduct myself. So I started with that too. And I saw that after some time, it was released. There was that which was like suffering or feeling uncomfortable wasn't uncomfortable anymore. I could do things that before I was afraid of doing, because what if I say the wrong things or do the wrong thing? And now, since my body has experienced it, I said, nothing bad happened. I just sat there and experienced that until the timer went off. I said, oh, this works. It's like a great tool. But there were some things in my life that just would not release in this kind of expanded state. And it had something not, I could say like only doing that with a timer without bringing in Antriyaman, it would not work. It would be pure psychology. So for me, it was the alchemy, some kind of combustion that happened of inviting in the divine presence. I call it the divine, even though the one who brought it in was an atheist. He said, if you want to call it divine, it's your business. He said, I don't call it that. But if you want to call it that. So that was also freedom, even there. So it wasn't like he was influencing me, like you should do it this way. He just said, this is how I do it. It's just very simple. So just connect with Antriyaman and then just stay with the suffering for as many minutes you want. And he would say, boil in the feeling, like you're boiling eggs, you boil in the feeling. And when you have the Antriyaman there, then something happens to that. You can also see it like you're like a hen, like a chicken, and you are lying on an egg and just wait for the egg to hatch. So just stay with the suffering like you're a hen hatching an egg. He would have those kind of things. Or like you see, suffering is like a little dog running around. It's not your dog, it's not my dog, it's just some dog running around. Just experience that. It's nobody's, it's just there. And I'm starting to, through these simple analogies, to get the hang of this. The simpleness of just experiencing whatever is at hand. But there was some deeper existential sufferings that no matter how I couldn't really focus on it. So I went down to India in 2003, a year and a half after doing these. And these processes went on every night. I would do this. I mean, it has such a profound shift and change in my life with the egg timer that I just got to find out the living masters that had been teaching and giving this man this experience of the Antriyaman. So it was after coming back from that trip that my life changed tremendously. I got connected to the great compassionate light, or like a golden orb that later I came to call the Great Compassionate Light. But it was a light that is intelligence that was moving through the different chakras, different energy centers in the body, and just had the same phenomenon of what this man has been sharing. Just see what is there. So that's what this golden orb did as it came in through an energy transfer of the dasas, the monks there that they were giving in my master's presence, Sri Aman, Sri Bhagwan. They were giving this called Diksha. It's a transfer of state. And a golden orb came into my head. And all of these chakras were then seen by this golden orb. So everything that is in my personalities or experience, whatever this being is, was totally like exposed to this light. Like the light saw everything. And since I had been doing this for 1.5 years, my brain was like in the habit. You know, when you do something over and over, the neurons in the brain start forming pathways. So that did not trip me out that this was happening. It was actually, oh, this is wonderful, because I get a tremendous spotlight on everything that is happening here. And my antriyaman just like expanded tenfold. I don't know how to speak. So a tremendous state was given to me that shifted my whole perception. So when I came back, I was actually so happy, Stephen, that I didn't even know how to work. I didn't know how to function, you know. So I called in a doctor. I said, how can I ever book clients? Because how can I figure out anything? And he, of course, he just looked at me after this doctor's visit, and he wrote a paper that I should go see a counselor, and a psychologist or something. So I went to the psychologist, and she heard my story too. So happy, been to India, this has happened. I just don't know how to, I'm not functioning. I'm just so happy. And I had this expanded state that I'm one with the universe. I'm like super big and super small at the same time. I'm very heavy and very light at the same time. I would have this paradox states and electrical experiences in the spine and all of these things. And she said, it ended with, she said, I also want to go to India. And she said, you know, I'll put a sick leave for you for 5 weeks. I'm sure this will be just fine. So this was a very wise counselor. So I got 6-week pay and just be in these states that were happening. And it wasn't like I was doing something. Priorly for 1.5 years, I was definitely doing the egg timer, big time. But after coming back from India and this golden light hit me, it was like living inside me. So it was guiding in a very joyful, childish way, in childlike way, you could say. And I would just, finally, I would get used to this being happy. And I realized that time, Stephen, that's when I saw that I've never really been happy in my life. You know, that's why I said that existential suffering, you know, where I saw a picture of me as a baby. Even as a baby, I was like, I look, you know, miserable, like, why am I here? You know, like, this is a baby on a quest. You know? So it was, that joy hit me that time, 2003, August 2003. And I started sharing about my experience. After 5 weeks, it was my clients that were asking me, so Anette, you're so different from where you were before, because I was actually present with them. Before, as they speak of their problem, you know, I would sit and think about how to help them and this and that. Now I'm just so happy, you know, seeing their face, listening to their voice, just being with them is joy, is happiness, and it's something fulfilling, you know. So they said, you know, you're so different. What happened to you in India? What can you share? And it costs some money to go for me for an hour. So I said, I can't talk about that on your clock, but let me gather those people who are interested in my living room on Sunday. I'll share some of these experiences I've had. So a friend of mine who had a big website at the time, he put it out on his website that Annette's going to share her experiences from India. And he asked me, can he put it out? Oh, sure. I thought nobody will come. So people came from all over Sweden and Denmark. There was like 90 people coming into my living room. So it was, I think I shared all this already, but that was the beginning of this. Okay, I want to really come out with this message of the suffering. And I saw that the suffering and the Antriyaman, okay, the Antriyaman thing, people like to hear, yes. And they wanted me to give dikshas or healings or treatments and this and that. But the suffering part, they would listen and they would kind of not, it's not so interested. And I saw that at the time, especially, it's much easier to run away from suffering than to be conscious. Because I knew for myself that I had been suffering all my life. And some part of it I was conscious of, and some part I was not conscious of or didn't even know that I needed help with to overcome. So in a way, I've been struggling with teaching this to people. And a very wise TV producer said to me, because she wanted to bring me into the Swedish television. I was there a few times and interviewed, but she said, I don't think your message will be really heard until the world out there is more suffering and there's no way to escape. Because right now, you go see a movie, go have some pizza, go call a friend, do this, do that, Nobody's locked in until 2 years ago, right? So in a sense, even though it's not a joyous thing to see, there is a possibility of a huge awakening happening for humanity in the current situation, because there is not so much escape. And if people just know that there is a tool, there is a way that we can surf on these times to understand what is suffering and the different kinds of suffering and what do I do with it. And that's why I thought we could bring that as a topic. A long answer to that question, why you want to bring up suffering.
No, it seems like very core to your path. And, it's somewhat ironic, but it also reminds me, your story also reminds me of the Buddhist path, which was, he was not in any kind of physical or emotional suffering. He lived a life of leisure and opulence, and yet he was in touch with the suffering of the world. When he saw the outside world, he is very much in touch with seeing people age. He had been sheltered from aging, sheltered from disease, and sheltered from death. Whenever someone got sick or old, they would be taken off the staff and they bring in someone young and attractive again. And so he never got to experience what that was like. So there's also, I guess, there's sort of a shock effect when you've led a pretty nice life to then all of a sudden see the suffering around you. And so maybe this the shock effect in some way that the Buddha experienced and that maybe you experienced, that I guess I because your suffering was on physical or emotional, there's a tendency to sort of think it's not real suffering. But I know what you're saying. There's a deeper suffering, and I find it. I have this group called the Spiritual Friendship Group, and I just I float different topics, and we get together and talk about it. And I floated the one topic of, is there a purpose to life? And oh my goodness, I got people coming out of the woodwork. Like, what? It was surprising to me that there was so much interest in that question, is there a purpose to life? So, I think that touches on that existential suffering, the deeper suffering that we can't quite get our head around, our arms around. And so I didn't mean to sort of minimize your suffering, but I found it ironic that that's the topic you wanted to talk about. But I think also, and as you were talking, there's this other part of it comes back to sort of seeing you as leading a charmed life, because there was sort of an intervention, and this energy was given to you, and there was an intervention, divine intervention, that really moved you out of that place of suffering and into another way of living. And I think that's the part that's hard to get to. And I understand the point that if you have to sort of, in a way, you were cleansing yourself or preparing yourself by focusing on the suffering, by not being afraid to face your suffering. And so that prepared you for that moment of grace.
Thank you so much for clarifying so beautifully.
Oh,
it's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Because on that lecture, I was touched by that grace that showed me the teaching to prepare. This is how you prepare. And when I, a year and a half later, came down to India and experienced that golden orb that filled me, then I was prepared fully. And when I came back, I saw the existential suffering was a suffering that has to do with being separate from the source. That's, for me, what is existential suffering is the sense of separation, that you have this illusion that you are looking for something, or you're looking for something there is not one answer for it. Like your topic, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of life? That is some kind of existential suffering, because there is no real answer. There's nobody who would have an answer for that, or at least not to be relieved by it. I believe it is that divine intervention, if you can call it that, is what humanity is looking for, and will end that suffering. And that will end the separation.
Yeah, if it was only that easy, that would be great. But I experienced it because I was a mental health counselor and also hospice chaplain. I really had to meet people where they were. And of course, with hospice chaplaincy, you don't have time. I mean, you might see them once or twice and then that's it. So I just had to, with mental health counseling, I could see some progress and growth, and over years of meeting, I would see them develop and change. But with hospice chaplaincy, there's not a whole lot you can do.
I would think it would be the opposite. I mean, working in a hospice in the last part of being in a biological form, that if you have that presence with you, you could really be of service to those people who are transitioning. You seem to be, I know a little bit of your background, Stephen, and you're very spiritual. So, I mean, your presence there with these beings would be very helpful and beneficial for them.
There were moments I could do something or say something or have some kind of presence that would change, but the vast majority of people were fixed. I mean, people are very fixed in their habits and routines and their self-images, and that's a tough thing to change.
You can also, like something that comes in the package of this golden orb, it's like everything is reversed, everything is turned inside out. Like when you take off a sweater, you go like this, right? And the sweater becomes inside out. That is also something that has happened to me. This is the closest thing I can do to try to explain it. I feel like I'm inside out. That when I meet other people, when they're suffering, they might not be able to get what I'm carrying or what I have to offer. but they are inside me. They are a part of me. And from that experience, a great compassionate light comes that could be beneficial for the other, or it could not for the other, depending on so many factors. But the experience of being inside out is a very beautiful, unspoken of experience to have, because it's total freedom. You know, you can sit on a bus and just see people come on and off the bus. I go a lot public transportation now. It's such an experience. And it's just like, wow, I'm just getting so blissed out. Just experience that inside out. And I believe, at least my living masters are saying, that a person who is connected to the light in whatever degree is affecting the environment and creating opportunities and possibilities for new things to come in. And that's where I'm thinking we're heading now as humanity, because there's less possibility to run away from our lives. We're more like faced with it. But if some people, if even a small amount of people were to awaken to their presence inside and not mind the outside, whatever that shows up, if it's sick people or mentally challenged or whatever it is, you know, we could affect the collective consciousness. So that's where my passion is now.
Yes. And if there were 100 people like you, I would just put one on each bus and you just, everybody would change in those buses. But unfortunately, there are not 100 people like you in Sweden.
I think there are a lot of people like this. And maybe they are just not putting words on it.
I think the potential is there.
Yes.
Let me tell you a little of my story, and then I want to compare and contrast, because I think I arrived at a similar place, but my karma and my karma was much more dense, and I had much more suffering to work through, I guess. So I grew up in a family where my father was very racist, violent, and drank a lot. And my mother was very withdrawn. So because of that, I always felt this hole in myself that I did not feel like I was seen or loved or cared for. I was sort of, I always put myself on the same level as our dog. We had a Labrador retriever. And they would put a plate out with food on it and give it, some water to drink and a place to sleep. And I felt like the Labrador retriever and I were on that same level. I mean, but I was also beaten a lot, and that added a whole nother level to the whole suffering. When I graduated from college, I had this hunger to, this was the existential part. Do you mind if I talk about this? Or?
No, I can feel that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So this existential part, I just felt a hunger, but I wasn't exactly sure what I was hungry for. And my last class at the University of Maryland in the United States, I attended a seminar on Emile, the book Emile by Rousseau. And in that book, he said, the purpose of life is to be happy, is to find happiness. And I thought that was such a beautiful statement. I wanted to talk about it. And I realized as we were talking in the class that there was not a single person in the class that had any idea how to find happiness, including the teacher. And we never came back to the topic again. I felt very unsatisfied. It was like one of those Zen koans. I got it in my head and then I couldn't get it out. And at the time, the Vietnam War was raging. And when I graduated from college, the military was after me. They wanted me to go to Vietnam and fight, and I didn't want to go. And I got an exemption as a conscientious objector, but it just got very complicated. And so my wife and I were going to flee to Canada. to seek asylum. And I think Sweden was one of those places where you could flee to during that time. And on the way to Canada, my car broke down. It had something mysterious was wrong with it. I couldn't figure it out. We owned a little French Simca, which I don't know if you're too young to remember those cars, but they had all the grace and elegance of a Kleenex box. I mean, it was
Okay.
it was just a square box that on wheels. And now this is back before, air transport and everything was big, but so they ordered a part and it took 2 weeks. It had to be shipped by boat from France to Minnesota, which was in the middle of the United States. So we had 2 weeks to kind of be in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and we liked it. We stayed there, and one thing led to another, and I wound up meeting the person who became my guru, Swami Rama. He was the former Shankaracharya of South India. He's a very high-level yogi. He had been living in a cave monastery since he was 4, and very high-level person. And he didn't take any interest in me. I was too dark, too dense, too messed up. But he taught me I was taught how to meditate. I was given a mantra, had initiation. And so every day I meditated. I've been doing it for 48 years, every day. And I just sort of in a blue collar way, just grinded myself forward, day after day. Talking about setting with your suffering, that definitely was. It was not an intentional setting with my suffering, but I definitely was setting in suffering. And listening to the noise in my head and feeling the confusion in my own self. And then there was some element of grace, just like you mentioned. For me, it took a lot longer. And it came out of the blue. It was not, something came in me. And I just felt I was in this space of serenity that was really profound. And I went to one of Swami Rama's lectures, and I was way in the back. I was like, I don't know, there was an auditorium of about 350 people, and I was, about 2 rows from the back. And even though I was so far away, there was an intermission during the lecture, and he walked all the way up the steps and said, "I want to talk to you," and then went down. And I followed him, and he had been, I'd been in the periphery, but all of a sudden he noticed me. And as soon as I got in the room, he said, "What have you been doing?" And I kind of knew what he was relating to, because I was in this very serene space. And I said I had been, teaching meditation. And he said, "Whatever you're doing, do it. Keep doing it." So there was that moment of sort of like discovery. I think this was after probably about 8 or 9 years of meditating every day. But I couldn't hold on to that state. It drifted away, and I oscillated back and forth. And there's lots of other stories I could go to, but I want to go to the sort of concluding stories that links up with what you just said. He would do a little bit of stuff with mind games with his students, and he definitely did that with me. And he knew I was sort of like, I don't know what you would call it, spiritually ambitious, if you want to put it that way. And I was very hungry for some kind of attainment. And I think I had that taste of what it felt like, and I wanted more of it. And so I came up, I would drive up, it was 5.5 hours to drive up to see him. And I drove up one time, and I was listening to his lecture, and he came out of the hallway, and he saw me in the hallway, and he said, "The next time you're up here, I want you to make an appointment, and I want to give you a higher initiation." And I thought, oh, wow, this is great. This is what I've been longing for. And at this point, I'd probably been meditating about 15 years. And so, right away, maybe about 3 or 4 months later, I made an appointment with his secretary, and I drove all the way up 5.5 hours. And after the lecture, I waited for, I went to his secretary and said, I have an appointment. And I waited in this little waiting room and went in to see him. And he had this beautiful display of cactuses. He had this beautiful apartment that was very sunlit. He had cactuses all over the place. So he was showing me all his cactuses, and I'm thinking, like, what's going on here? And then we sit down, and he said, well, what can I do for you? And I said, well, you said the next time I come up to make an appointment, and we'll do a higher initiation. He said, oh, I don't have time now. There's other people waiting. So the next time you come up, make an appointment and we'll definitely do a higher initiation. I thought, okay, it's very curious. So, I waited another 3 or 4 months. I gave it some time. I made another appointment. And this time I decided I'm not going to let him fool me this time. I'm going to get right to it. And, so he let me into his apartment, and I sat down, and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, you said that you wanted me to come up because you wanted to do a higher initiation. And he said, oh, shoot, I don't have time today. I have all these people waiting in the lobby. The next time you come up, why don't you make an appointment? I thought, okay, I'm being played here. I didn't say that, but I was definitely thinking there's something going on. I'm not going to fall for this anymore. So I stopped making appointments, but I still went up to see him. So every time he would see me, he would come up to me and say, the next time you're here, I want you to make an appointment. And it's, I decided if he really wants to see me, he will pull me into his office and he will make it happen. I'm not going to do this making appointments thing and driving up anymore. And then the next time I went up, I waited like 6 months or something. And I went back. I just stopped focusing on this higher initiation thing. But this time something was different. There was a different tone about him. And he came out of the lecture hall and he took my hand and he said, he just tugged me and indicated to walk with him. So I'm walking down the hall holding his hand, and I'm feeling a little self-conscious holding his hand. But it was also special at the same time. And then he got to his door and said, he said goodbye. And I thought, something's about this that I don't quite understand. So I went back home, and then I found out, he had moved to India. And so seeing him was not possible. And then I found out he died. And of course, the first thing I thought was, hey, wait a minute, what happened to this higher initiation thing? And I thought, oh my goodness. And I felt sort of, brokenhearted about the whole thing. And then darker things started surfacing. It turned out he had been having sexual relations with some of the young women who were 18, 19, 17. And there was a lawsuit about it, and they sued for money, and the Himalayan Institute made a settlement with these young women. And I felt, I don't know, sort of betrayed. And I put away his books, I put away his pictures. I kept doing the same meditation, same mantra. But for 5 years, I didn't read any of his books anymore. And then gradually I was teaching meditation. And sorry the story's so long, but
no,
I appreciate,
I'm listening.
yeah, I appreciate you allowing me to share it. I don't think I've ever told anyone this whole story. And gradually the books came out, and I was teaching meditation, and I was running into all kinds of things, and I needed more and more, information about what to do and suggestions. And so gradually, little by little, all the books started coming back out of the closet. And something started happening, and I don't really understand what it was. I do understand part of it. I felt very drawn to do the Gayatri. And I started doing the Gayatri Mantra, and I did it. I said 1,000 Gayatris a day, which took me about 5 hours each day. And I did this for 2.5 years. And I think there was something in me that was pushing big time. And then I was sitting in meditation one day and I had this like flash experience where this light, the window became really bright. And I felt like something was downloaded in me. I had this very distinct feeling that there was something that was happening, and I felt something was put into me. And then, it kind of disappeared, and I thought, what was that? And then things started changing radically. I woke up every morning at 3:00 and meditated. And this is where this connects with your point about suffering. I meditated, and then I would burst into tears, and I would just feel so much suffering. And then I would get up in the morning, do my normal meditation, and go about my day. And then the next night, 3:00, I'd be woken up. I felt like I was woken up, like something was waking me up, and I would meditate. And this went on for 5 months. And I was reaching the point of exhaustion, sleep deprivation. And then I don't know exactly what happened, but it felt like a veil had fallen from my eyes. And all of a sudden, all my senses were like magnified by 3. Felt like I had the eyes of an artist, the ears of a musician, the tactile touch of a blind person. And everything was so astonishingly beautiful. It was overwhelming. I could hardly function. Come back to your story of hardly function. And I was selling real estate. So like, it was really difficult to show houses and drive a car. And I felt like I had to put on blinders like a horse. Because if I looked at a tree, I would fall in love, and I would just freeze in place, and like I couldn't do anything. So I was in this state, and I was trying to manage it. And it was there 24 hours a day, and it lasted for 15 days. And it was like, I was so overwhelmed. I just could not function. And I was happy, peaceful. I was living on 3.5 hours sleep a night, and I only had one dream in 15 days. There was no need for dreaming. And then after 15 days, suddenly the veil came back, and I thought, oh no, this is awful. Now this is a real existential suffering. And at the end of that whole 15-day period, I heard my teacher's voice loud and clear. And I looked around the room like it was startling. And he just said, don't be selfish. Like, okay, what is going on here? And I realized, it took me years to realize it, but this was the higher initiation that he had always talked about. I just didn't realize it would happen after he had passed away.
Wow, that's beautiful. What an amazing story. Wow.
So I got there, but I had to go through, I think my experience, and I'll just tell you my experience and comparing and contrasting our two different experiences, is I think I had a lot of bad karma I had to work through. And and that can happen. I have very clear memories of past lives. And I was a Polish soldier in the D-Day invasion during World War II. And I killed a lot of people. And I think I had a lot of heavy, dark karma to go through because of that. and because of other things. So I think it's beautiful that you were graced, and you come from this place almost like an angelic, like it was like a nudge, and then you remember. I know it didn't come across that easy. but for me, I had to do the sort of soldiering. I had to do the blue collar, grind my way forward. I think I got to that place, but it was a struggle, and I had to go through a lot of suffering. And it's just like, I think we are all individually different. I mean, I think if I had you as my next door neighbor and I could just sit with you every day, I probably wouldn't have to have gone through such a horrible, long ordeal. But because you have that natural grace and that natural gift, and that there's no good or bad about it. It's just you were in a different place karmically than me. But the grace is still there, even though, the teacher didn't see it. Even my own teacher didn't see it in me at all. But I kept polishing myself until I was worthy, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I believe there are no answers of timing. Like, I think everyone has their own alarm clock when to awake from their antriyaman, because it's an inside job. An outside teacher can come, like your teacher, and initiate a process that then took off. But I don't believe it has to do with being worthy, because then nobody would get it. But I understand what you're saying, because I went through that. I was thinking I'm not worthy. And it was actually one of the last things before the golden orb came in. When I was in India, I had that process in a little hut, with the banana leaf roof. And it was very hot. It was August in India. It's very hot. And we were just told that we were going to receive a diksha from our masters, the avatars, Sri Amama and Sri Bhagwan. And what it meant, it could give you all kinds of gifts, spiritual gifts, or whatever it is that you're meant for. And that very topic came also up for me then, of, I just happened to be in India when they're doing this, because Bhagwan had been in silence for 3 months. Nobody knew what was happening. And now he just announced it. And it was my last day there. My flight was going back the same. So I realized I just happened by chance to be here in India at this time. And there are others here who are much more spiritually advanced than I am. And I am not worthy. I just happen to be lucky, somehow to be here. And I'm definitely not worthy. And I thought, and the pain of not being worthy, I understand what you're saying. But there's actually, I found out through this experience that, my antriyaman is always teaching through humor. That's how I know that I'm on the right path. If it's something complicated, then it takes too long. But this was a very profound experience in this little hut. So I was on the floor, actually, in such pain, just feeling I cannot receive. Here are two great beings that want to give us something tomorrow, and I cannot receive because I'm not worthy to receive such a gift. That was a really core issue for me. I've always been very shy and withdrawn and always felt like unworthy kind of person. But that's how most people are. I think maybe in Scandinavia, I don't know. We're very shy, very simple. It's very common to say, humble in a sense, but in a negative sense, it's not so great, So I just felt I'm not worthy to receive something like that. And the pain got more and more, to the point where I started hitting myself. I was so sweaty, I was so miserable physically, and I was just like, I don't want to receive that. I can't, because I don't know how to. And it's very difficult to even remember that pain. But I realized that my antriyaman gets physical also with me. It gets projected outside. So it's again the inside out sweater kind of thing. So even though my antriyaman lives in here, I have my divine physical with me at times. And this was one of the first times it showed up. So my divine was sitting there on the little cot. I was on the floor, and my hair was in a big mess with mud because it was a mud floor, and I was sweating and I was hitting myself, and I was like in the drama, in the drama of the story. I'm not worthy. And I noticed that my divine is sitting there on the cot, looking very interested. And that was like, this is odd, I thought he would do something. He would like remove the suffering or something. But this was real. It was a drama, but it was real, my drama at the time, a core. And then finally I stopped. He didn't do anything. He just sat there looking at me. Finally, I got exhausted in the heat and of hitting. I was just exhausted. I just stopped. And with the whole thought process of the emotion was, I'm not worthy. And he looked at me and he said, when I stopped, well, I guess you're going to have to receive it anyway. And that was the end of that. And I was like, I remember I was just so startled by that. And he said, there is a satsang with one of the dasas. If you hurry, you'll make it because you get more instructions of what you're supposed to do tomorrow. Because at that time, all the exhaustion was out, so I couldn't even. So I remember I just kind of pulled all this messy, gooey hair in some kind of scarf, and I ran to this bigger hut where this dasa, the monk, was giving some instructions of how tomorrow we're going to go down there. So then I was all excited, because I have to receive it anyway. What? So there's no point of, well, now you're worthy. No, just similar to what you share your teacher, it's a sense of humor, or like, it's never what you think. That's how my life has been since then.
It's funny how you incorporate humor into your spirituality. I think that's charming. It adds a lightness to it.
Yes, I have an agreement with my divine, my Antriyaman, that because I've read so many books, Stephen, since I was 3 years old, I started going Sunday school, and Father who art in heaven, the only one in the family like this. And everyone was like, can't you just like lighten up a little bit? I'm just so sincere. And then confirmation and reading books and finding God. Then it's my whole seeking, my whole life. I've been so serious about this and just looking into all religions and trying this and, eyebrows always like that. So when finally this came into my life through the simple man, the simpleness, then is the contrast of being so intellectually knowledgeable and always with the sincere. I saw this is a man who's never read a book in his life, and he came with a gift. He sure gave me an experience of a gift that led me to the big gift. So I made an agreement with my divine when I was in India. This is real, but don't get me into that I think I know something here. I'll be in trouble. Put me in a state of surprise. This is something I asked for. I want to live in a state of surprise because I'll be alive. See, if I feel like, and actually then I met, of course, my Sri Bhagwan, my teacher, in a personal meeting. And he said, the way he teaches, or the way this Dharma is with him, it's like a horse and a carriage. The horse comes first, the power comes first, and the carriage is the teaching. It comes afterwards. So focus on the experience, because, I shared my experience. He said, you got the experience. Don't worry about the cart. It will come. See, most pathways, they have the cart coming first and the horse is pushing it. Here's the teaching. Now try to get it. And then he said to me something and he sat on this chair and I sat on the and he leaned forward. He said, teachings, very, very dangerous for your health. You know, it's like the signs of the cigarette packs. It can kill you. And that's the kind of humor he has. You know, he teaches always through humor. So he recommended that I wouldn't take too many courses. He was starting to give 21-day courses. He said, don't take that. You know, this what's happened to you is beautiful. Just share from that. And I said, but why shouldn't I like have some teaching? I should have something profound to say or something. He said, no, you can tell some stories, you can sing, you can dance. What? But, you know, he came to be true because my whole way of teaching has been through my own experience, like you shared your experience. And I believe every human being have their own story and their own experience. And it's through that we can share. Because if I were tempted to come into a satsang with some kind of profound teachings, I think people would fall asleep, you know. So I was not allowed for any courses or teachings for 1.5 years. And then I was traveling to one country every week. And then coming back, giving treatments. I was like nonstop, and 2 children on my own, and my family, my children, my parents, you know, all of this happening at once. And this joy, just this joy. And the gift of living in a surprise and living these 2 things. Don't be afraid to meet your suffering. So I wasn't afraid anymore. And that took me like a surfing, like a surfer is just surfing from wave to wave, because I don't mind going down under, you know, I just go with the flow of things. And sometimes all kind of crazy things would happen, but I always had my Antriyaman, and it was my inner best friend that sometimes it would show up physically if there was need for it. So
back up. Or just, what do you mean by that?
If well, the divine never became physical, like an entertainment kind of thing. Like if I would say, because it's a sacred presence, it's a huge presence. If I say, can you please show up physically for me now? You know, he would respond, why? Why should I do that? You know, what's the purpose of that? Because I would like you to, you know, that's just no. It's like, right. You know, get real, you know. So it has happened at times where I really needed help. At the time I moved into a house, about my first house, and I found out that it was not a good vastu in the house. Feng shui, it was horrible. And the dasa saw, how could you buy this house without getting someone looking at it? And I realized that I was in over my head, and I said, and I was crying on the floor in the middle of the house, just asking for divine to bless this house, because it was not a good house the way it was built or something. And at that time, I didn't know any Indian ceremonies or anything. I just had incense sticks, you know. I was walking around crying, divine, you need to come here. Give me a sign that you will. I want you to live in this house. Only that could change the vastu or the negative energies if you live here. So I want you to live, because I know that they have been here physically appearing, but they only come, it's mystical. I cannot make them come. But so finally, after like 2 hours of this, nothing happened. I just surrendered on my stomach, crying on the floor, but still praying. And just a little pling-a-ling I was asking for, a little like ding-a-ling-ling, just a sign, just something. And then I hear the back, what do you call it? Altan door, like the terrace door. It was a sliding door. I could hear it open, like that. So I went up, and here comes, in the form of my spiritual teachers, Amma Bhagwan, the divine feminine, divine masculine, that I had the form as my Antriyaman, came in. And it was as physical as I see you now. That was the most physical I've ever seen this happen. I've seen my divine as light beings, as light, but this time where it was really needed, because yes, I had made an ultimatum. I said, if you don't give me some kind of sign, and I meant little pling-a-ling or something, I'm taking this key back to the bank. I'm bringing this deal is off. That's what I did, the ultimatum. Maybe that's why they figured, why is she going to go through this, Anyway, I had this experience, it must have been 2009 or something, where they physically came in and talked to me and showed me things that I could do to change the vastu. So it was physically in room by room. So I was walking with them. Bhagwan, he came and he sat by the wall and he just meditated. And Amma is more like Divine Mother. She was more like, oh, the kitchen is great. The kitchen is wonderful. We're going to cook some great meals here. And after some time, I goes, am I losing my mind? Am I like in a hallucination now? I mean, I've had spiritual experiences before, but this I've never experienced. So I thought maybe I need to lie down. This is a little too much. So the whole house was empty because I haven't moved in yet. I was just there with my key, right? So I went into the room that was to be my room, my bedroom. So I said, I'm going to go in there. And I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I thought, that was a great dream I had. I dreamt that my Amma Bhagwan came into this house. And then as I had that thought, I hear the sound in the hallway. They're still here. I would like run up, what? And Amma's like, what are you still doing? You have so much work to do. You got to do all the packing in your apartment. What are you doing here? So I was like, okay. So that was a very joyful experience. So that's why I say they come when it's really needed. For some reason, they decided to show up physical at that time. And they've done it other times too. But when it's really needed, we don't need to have that all the time. But at that time, it was a great need. And of course, I then started a mystical journey because then I felt their presence in the house and lots of miracles happen in that house. I mean, huge miracles happen. And my role was more like a servant. I'm serving. I've always loved Lord Hanuman. And, he had divine in his heart. He loves the divine, and he's also some kind of military. I like discipline in military. So I kind of like that. So I felt I'm here to live in this palace, even though it was a little pink house. It's a palace where the divine lives and I can serve. And that's where I was there for 7 years with my children. They each had a room and lots of wonderful things happened in that house until one day, then Amma appeared in the kitchen, or I was ironing, and she said, let's sell the house. We're going on for new adventures. See, this is how I have it. It's an agreement. Really? And it was a perfect time to sell the house because I made profit and I could do lots of other beautiful things in life. But just so my life is never planned necessarily. I will have some things maybe that, oh, this would be nice to do, but I always work with the divine. Like this studio I'm in right now, it's also my sacred chamber. This is a room where my divine lives. So when my children were large enough to move out, I live with my divine. I thought I always wanted to have a room where my divine lives, in all the different forms, formless, form, presence, where I can go and just meditate. And of course I could call it meditation room, but it's much more than that. It's where I have this communication with the divine, where it's alive with me. And anything I want, like I have also pictures of my family and ancestors here, and all of these things that are important in my life. So that which is called prayers and blessings, and meditation is for me a happening. It's just sitting down to be with what is here. So these two things are still what's working with me, like to meet whatever is here. And it's so wonderful to sit in this chair. Sometimes I have interviews or meetings like with you. Sometimes I'd have meditations or I have private clients, or it's a wonderful life to be living. And this is I'm just sharing how I have it, because there are like 8 billion people who have different ways. But I saw that as I share my experience and how I have it in my life, like the mantra. I know you're from India, you've been to India a lot. So Nara Narayana, I like that chant a lot. If you're familiar with that. Nara Narayana is like you're here as an individual, but you're part of the one, like a cell in the body. There's no body without the cell, and there's no cell living without the body, the wholeness. So that's how I experience my life, that I'm a part of something huge. So as we talked maybe before we recorded about, you talked about the self, I think, or the importance of the self. And I could take that, I don't really know what you meant by that, but as I experience the individual consciousness, it is that like a cell in the body is here to serve the whole, because otherwise none of this will work, right? So we are all part of each other, like the Mayan said in Lakesh, I am another you. So we see each other, like when you turn yourself inside out, just see other aspects of yourself, and it's a mystery and it's a magic, and there's definitely no answers, at least not in my world, because I live in a constant state of surprise. I can have a request for something. I would like to have this kind of experience, if that is that, but that rarely happens actually. But maybe I ask more for practical things for my family and things like that. Things will always work out, always, in the best way. And there's something wonderful happening here and here, because I don't have to carry burdens and figure things out. Of course, I use the gifts I have to do what I can, but there is a hand in the back, like that. And these things has got to be experienced, each one in their own way. And like you shared, you had different karmic experience, you had different experience that are very important for you to go through, to complete. I believe we have a sacred agreement before we come into our life. And I think anyone who is alive at this point is very lucky, because collectively something is happening to us in humanity right now. It's beneficial for us, no matter what entrance we came in. You came in through a very difficult entrance, right? But somehow it led you to where you're at and led you to your teacher, even though that also ended up being a little weird. It led you to, wow, you got the upgrade he promised you, and then you got that experience, and now here we are. So everyone, even though their lives might have been filled with so much suffering, or maybe no suffering at all, but they're running away from it, by escaping into things, or whatever our life stories. Once we come to this presence, we step out of the story and we enjoy the story. So there's that Nara Narayana, that joy and that love of the dance between the beloved and the beloved, that kind of thing. I like those stories a lot. I can relate to it.
Yes, you are definitely, you are a presence. I think of you as just a presence. Like, I think we should just move you around and let you sit in different people's living rooms, and you won't have to say anything, just sit there, and we'll move you to another living room. You can go from house to house healing families and healing people.
But I believe it's like that farmer carpenter, he said, I wish he just had a wish from his heart, that I wish that this could be contagious, like a positive disease. Well, I was hit by it.
I think you are a positive disease.
Yeah, and then if that can hit somebody like you,
yes.
hit others, that's how it goes around.
Yeah.
It goes faster than any virus.
Yeah, I really appreciate your energy, your sort of presence, your being. I think it contrasts with mine, because I still feel I have some heaviness to work through. And I think part of it is, my childhood. There's this whole, and we had talked about, or I brought up the issue of aloneness. And that's a difficult thing for me, because I spent so much of my childhood alone. And so I don't experience aloneness as solitude. I experience as a sort of an emptiness or as a aching isolation to that. And I'm trying to work my way through it. And I think I am. I'm getting used to being alone. But I also have to deal with chronic pain, which is another issue. Talking about the suffering. I mean, that suffering is with me 24/7, doesn't go anywhere. So I guess we each have our own paths. I do relate. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, do you have connection to your antriyaman?
I'm not familiar with that word so much, but
the one that dwells within, divine that dwells within, the sacred presence within. Do you have connection? Because everyone has it.
Yes.
I mean, everyone has that presence. I just call it antriyaman in this case because it's a new word that nobody knows about. You know, if you call it higher sacred self, all these concepts are coming in. You say God and all this, that's why I like. So the presence inside.
Yeah, I have these, I don't know what you call them, visitations, I guess, where I suddenly, it's like the fog clears and suddenly this divine within myself is just there. And it's not different from me, it is me. And then the thought comes back in and then I get all lost in the storyline and all that. So I have those moments, and it's on a regular basis now where, the fog clears and suddenly who I am is I'm just in who I am, which is the same as the inner divine. It's just, there's no difference at all. But then the fog comes back again. So I oscillate back and forth.
Sometimes when we use our physical body and our emotions, we get out of the fog. So you can put your hands over your heart and you can have a wish. I wish to have connection with the indweller, the one that dwells within, or whatever you want to call it, this presence. Because at least from my experience, it's the only thing that can really relieve this suffering. Since our topic is suffering here, that's the answer, and we need to be conscious that we are suffering, which you are, both existential, physical, psychological. I mean, you're very advanced in your spiritual level too, but as you then give that, surrender into that presence in here, and for you to surrender into that, you have to discover that relationship first, because it can exist inside you as a formless, but you can also have it in a form because it's easier to relate to it. Like a Christian could have Christ, or Buddhist could have, Buddha or something. You could have some kind of form, or you could have your master's form, any God realized, awakened, enlightened being you could have, and talk to it, saying what it is you need help with. That is a very fast way.
I find that you were relating your story of the house and the sort of feeling sort of desperately in need of some connection. When I reach that point of desperation, it does happen. Like something happens and then that reconnection happens. But for me, it happens in an odd way. It happens through animals. And I was telling you, I had written you about this interview, and I was right at the point of sending it, and I looked out the window, and there was a bear. I live in the suburbs. There was a 250-pound bear that had its nose pressed against my screen door, and I thought, well, this is a sign. This is a real sign, and bears really are about healing. And that is, I'm part Native American, and I think the animals come forward. I'm having all these very unusual experiences with animals coming forward, and just like, I don't have to go anywhere because I'm disabled, I'm limited. So they come up on the deck and they come to visit me. Like, what? And it's sort of shocking. And I come back to that sense of surprise. When it happens, it's sort of mind-blowing. It's like seeing
medicine. Yes,
it's medicine. Yeah. So they appear in physical form, but I really feel the divine there's more than coincidence going on here. It's just something synchronistic, that there's some kind of reaching out to me to let me know I'm not alone.
Yes, definitely. And the bear is for introspection. So maybe.
Oh, is it?
Yes. I was the father of my children is also Native American,
Right.
and 8th generation shaman.
Huh.
So, but before I even met him, I was heavily into the native. So
Okay.
I had this medicine wheels. I was really into the animals. This is long before, like in the early 80s, before I even started meditating.
So introspection, is that what you said?
Introspection. So the bear is signaling you to go inside.
Uh-huh.
So here you are wanting to come out of the inside world, and the bear is coming. But see, there is some kind of message here now I'm getting. If I may, since the bear came when you were writing to me, and here I am asking you, how is your relationship with your antriyaman, or your indweller, which is the bear? See, the bear pulls you inside. Because this story I shared about the house being desperate, at that time, the divine showed up physical. I mean, that's very rare. We shouldn't have to be desperate for that, It's a kind of humorous way. It's like, oh, she's really off the edge now, So it wasn't like, because the divine is there. So your antriyama, the indweller, it's like your inner best friend. And perhaps the bear is coming to you now saying, maybe it even wants to be the form of your antriyaman. Can I live inside your heart? Can you talk to me? Can I be your friend? Because see, the divine can take any form. The divine wants to pull you out of suffering. That's the very core of its mission, if you can say, to pull humanity out of suffering. But see, we need to understand the workings, the higher laws of consciousness, which is, we need to ask for it, connect with it. We as human beings, we're extraordinarily made, different from the animals. We can have cognitive function. We can connect to this presence. So science has discovered our brain, our heart, and our gut has similar neurons. So we have 3 brains actually. And if we connect to the antriyaman, and our gut is our intuition, right? And our antriyaman is the sacred presence. Or like when you meet someone, you say, I am, and you put your hand, on your heart. You don't say, I am, So the head is really like reversed, it's like the head should be down there. But if I were you, since you are there with the bear, I would focus on inviting your antriyaman, just saying, I would like to awaken to my antriyaman, and my antriyaman could just take care of me for the rest of my life. Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, don't you want that kind of like experience?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, that's how I made that kind of deal. I mean, it's 20 years ago now, and I'm living this magical fairy tale life. And it was not like that before, I can tell you, in a very practical way. It just changed my life because it's a real presence inside. And you already have had so many enlightened states or awakened states, where you are like fully present. So you already know that it's true. It's not like pulling somebody off like the street and never even know what we're talking about. I mean, what you could do is start experiencing or asking for, you remember that bear, you can say, do you want to be the form of my antriyaman bear? Or something else might come to you. Sit, because you know how to meditate. You can do it a little faster now, because the planet, the galaxy is in such a way that it's very beneficial for many people to go through this veil that you speak of. We don't have to be behind it.
I think there's another level of this aloneness that is actually sort of kind of comes with the territory. And that is that I find myself having difficulty finding other people to relate to at the same level I am. And it's not, I'm not saying I'm that high, but it's just that for most people, the world I operate in just is sorry, is that was the labradorite crystal that fell off my lap. For most people, the world I operate in is either delusional or nonsense, and so it's very hard for me to find people that I can even have, a friendship with and be fully myself with. But that kind of comes with the territory, I think.
No,
No?
no, I don't think so. I mean, the world is. I was thinking of how my teacher Sri Bhagwan said, alone is another word for all one. It depends on how you spell it. All one, alone, kind of. I don't know. It's a play words. Sometimes I understand it, sometimes.
Yeah. No.
It's kind of, so in a sense, we are a community. And of course, those who go similar pathways, like the oneness path, we are like a big family. But I feel humanity is like a family. I don't feel alienated from people on the bus or someone who's like yourself, who's been a lot of spiritual and advanced. For me, it's a perception. It's more like turning the sweater inside out again. It's like, why? It's just a perception, I think, that you can shift, because you could relate to anybody if you start seeing that they're another you. It's another part of you that you just forgot to love, maybe, or you forgot to smile at. It's just another all one, all own. I don't know. I was also alone a lot when I was little, and I was teased when I was little, because I was different, and I don't know. But it's, Stephen, it's stories that they get kind of old after some time. How long are we going to hold on to the stories? It's like, is there another movie? It's just, it's the same. So that's when I found Antriyaman and live in a state of surprise that anything can happen, really, literally. I have so many stories I could share that it would feel like weeks, of just, and I just wish that other people could also discover that they're divine, or it's dangerous to call it divine in Sweden. So I'm saying, maybe Antriyaman, or the presence, because it's concept. And I agree with a lot of Swedes. There's so much concepts around religious words that who needs it, really?
Right.
But there is, Stephen, there is a real presence inside, and you've experienced it. And there's a practical way to experience it by having it, welcoming it as a form, and start talking to it. Start relating to it. Don't be, alienated from your divine. It's your best friend. At least that's how I have it in my life.
Yes. Yeah, I have glimpses of that where I feel that, and it connects, and I feel at peace with it. But then I lose it and I drift away, and so I
now
go.
the bear is now in the window like this, just like, no more drifting. I'm coming.
That's very interesting. I'm going to have to research some more about the bear, or feel the bear energy and try to understand it. But it was just very striking. It was hard to get away from the synchronicity of it. So I always appreciate our conversations. I never know where they're going to go. And, and it's always a delight to talk to you. You definitely have become a teacher for me. I know I can't afford to pay you, but I definitely
the world is a teacher. Everything around us is always teaching us. We're eternal students of life. You can learn from anything.
Right. Well, I definitely learned from you.
Oh.
So I namaste.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for this interview and this dialogue. Thank you for everything you shared. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn off the recorder here. Oops, how do I do that? Wait, pause.